He spent years making my life miserable. Every day at school, he called me weird, stole my things, and treated me like I didn't belong. I was only a kid, and no matter what I did, the bullying never stopped. But one morning, after one final insult, something inside me changed. I saw an opportunity that he never expected, and in just a few seconds, everything turned upside down. He walked away covered in dirt, blood, and confusion, desperately searching for the person responsible. The craziest part? He never found out it was me. And weeks later, the school bully who tormented me simply disappeared from school forever. When I was in the 4th grade, school was supposed to be a place where I could make friends, learn new things, and enjoy being a kid. Instead, it became the place I dreaded the most. Every morning, as I walked through the school gates with my backpack hanging from my shoulders, I wondered whether that day would be peaceful or whether he would decide to make me his target again. He was a year older than me, taller, louder, and much more confident. He had the kind of personality that attracted attention, and because of that, most kids either laughed at his jokes or stayed out of his way. Unfortunately, I became one of his favorite targets. For reasons I never completely understood, he decided that I was strange. He would call me weird in front of other students, laugh at the way I talked, and make comments that caused the other kids to look at me differently. At that age, children often want only one thing: to fit in. I wanted friends, I wanted to enjoy recess, and I wanted to feel like I belonged. Instead, I began spending more time trying not to be noticed. I would avoid certain areas of the playground, stay quiet during class, and keep my distance whenever I saw him nearby. Many people can probably relate to experiences from their own childhood where one person had the ability to ruin an entire day. Sometimes it only takes one insult in front of classmates to make a child feel embarrassed for weeks. Sometimes a single bully can make school feel less like a place to learn and more like a place to survive. Every insult he threw at me stayed in my mind. Every laugh from the other kids felt like confirmation that maybe there really was something wrong with me. I never fought back. I never argued with him. Instead, I carried those feelings home every afternoon, hoping that the next day would somehow be different. But the next day always seemed to bring him back. And before long, the boy who should have been just another student at school became the person who made my childhood miserable. As the months passed, his behavior became more than just insults and teasing. What had started as occasional comments slowly turned into something that followed me almost every day. I never knew when he would appear, what he would say, or what he would decide to take from me. For him, it may have been entertainment, but for me, it became a constant source of stress. It wasn't only the names he called me anymore. He seemed to enjoy taking things that belonged to me. Sometimes, it was a pencil I had just bought. Other times, it was an eraser, a ruler, or small items that I had brought to school. None of these things were expensive. But when you are a child, even small belongings can feel important. A favorite pen, a special notebook, or something your parents bought for you can mean a lot. Each time something disappeared, I usually knew who had taken it, but proving it was impossible. If I asked him about it, he would deny it or laugh in my face. Sometimes he would show the item to his friends as if it belonged to him. Other times, it would simply vanish forever. The worst part was not losing the object itself. It was the feeling that I had no control over anything. Many people remember childhood moments like these because small events often leave big emotional marks. A child who repeatedly loses belongings or becomes the target of jokes can begin to expect bad things to happen. I started checking my desk several times a day. I kept my backpack close to me during recess. Even then, it never felt enough. At home, I rarely talked about what was happening. I did not want my parents to worry, And I honestly believed that if I stayed quiet long enough, things would eventually improve. Instead, the resentment continued to grow. Every insult, every missing item, and every embarrassing moment added another layer of anger that I kept hidden. The strange thing about bullying is that it often builds slowly. One bad day becomes a bad week, and eventually, it feels normal. I began expecting him to bother me. I expected him to laugh at me. I expected something to disappear from my desk. What should have been temporary became part of my everyday life. While other children were making memories about games, friendships, and school trips, I was learning how to avoid one particular person. I carried the frustration quietly, pretending that his actions did not affect me, even though they stayed in my mind long after the school day ended. And with every stolen belonging and every insult, the grudge inside me only grew stronger. By that point, I had already become used to expecting something bad whenever he was around. The insults, the stolen belongings, and the constant embarrassment had become part of my routine. I had spent so much time avoiding him that I almost convinced myself that staying quiet was the only way to survive elementary school. But sometimes, a person can carry frustration for so long that a single moment becomes the final straw. That particular morning seemed normal at first. Classes had started as usual, and during a break, a group of us gathered outside on the grass. There were around 7 or 8 boys, and we were doing what many kids do at that age, pretending to fight, pushing each other around, laughing, and falling into the grass. It was harmless, and honestly, one of the few moments when I felt like I belonged with the other kids. Then, he showed up. Nobody had invited him, but he joined the group anyway. The moment I saw him, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. After everything he had done over the years, seeing him always changed my mood immediately. Even when he said nothing, his presence alone was enough to make me uncomfortable. At some point during the game, he came close to me and suddenly slapped the back of my neck. To everyone else, it may have looked like a joke or rough play. Some of the boys probably laughed, and others may not have even noticed. But for me, it felt very different. It wasn't just a slap. It carried the weight of everything that had happened before. Anyone who has dealt with a bully knows that the final incident is rarely the biggest one. Often, it is the smallest action that breaks the dam. A comment, a push, or a simple act of disrespect can release years of frustration that have been building quietly inside. For me, that slap represented every stolen item, every insult, and every moment I had stayed silent. I remember feeling anger unlike anything I had felt before. I didn't react immediately. I didn't yell or push him back. Instead, I kept everything inside, just as I always had. But something had changed. For the first time, I stopped thinking about avoiding him and started thinking about how much I wanted all of this to end. The game continued, and everyone acted as though nothing had happened. But in my mind, that moment kept replaying over and over again. The sting on my neck eventually faded, but the feeling it left behind did not. That slap became the moment when years of silence finally turned into something else. After that slap, I couldn't focus on anything else. The rest of the morning felt different, almost as if time had slowed down. The other kids continued talking, laughing, and running around the playground, but my mind stayed fixed on what had happened. For years, I had ignored the insults, tolerated the stolen belongings, and convinced myself that staying quiet was the right thing to do. Yet that one moment kept repeating in my head. As we finished one round of our game, everyone started taking a short break. Some boys sat on the grass while others wandered around the playground. That was when I noticed him standing a short distance away. He was distracted, paying attention to a girl he liked, completely unaware of everything happening around him. Behind him was a small slope covered with loose dirt and scattered rocks. It was not a place where people usually stood for very long, but he seemed completely comfortable there. At first, I simply looked at him from a distance. My anger was still there, but now something else had appeared. An awareness that, for the first time, he was vulnerable. Many situations in life reach a point where people feel that everything has been building toward one particular moment. Sometimes it happens during an argument, sometimes after years of frustration, and sometimes during an ordinary day that suddenly feels different. Looking back, this was one of those moments for me. The years of humiliation, the stolen belongings, and the constant bullying all seemed to gather together at that exact point. I watched the other boys slowly move away. Some were talking among themselves, while others had gone back toward another area of the playground. Nobody was paying attention to him, and nobody was paying attention to me either. The noise of the schoolyard continued around us, but inside my head, everything became very quiet. People often say that anger causes people to act without thinking, but in that moment, I remember thinking more clearly than I had in a long time. I knew exactly where everyone was standing. I knew nobody was looking. Most importantly, I knew that he had no idea what was about to happen. There are moments in childhood that stay with people for decades, not because they are planned, but because they suddenly feel unavoidable. This felt like one of those moments. For years, he had always been the one with power. He decided when to insult me, when to embarrass me, and when to take something that belonged to me. For the first time, the situation had changed. And standing there beside that dirt-covered slope, he never realized that the moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. The next few seconds felt much longer than they probably were. I remember standing there, watching him from a distance while the rest of the boys had already moved away. He was still distracted, looking in another direction and completely unaware that anyone was paying attention to him. For years, he had been the one who controlled every interaction between us. He decided when to insult me, when to embarrass me, and when to remind me that I was smaller and weaker. But at that moment, the situation had quietly changed. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it in my ears. Part of me still wondered whether I should simply walk away, return to the others, and let another day pass like all the previous ones. But another part of me, the part that had carried years of anger, embarrassment, and frustration, was louder than ever. Without saying anything, I started running toward him. Everything happened incredibly fast. Before he even realized what was happening, I jumped forward and kicked him with both feet. The force caused him to lose his balance completely. Since he was standing near the dirt slope covered with loose rocks, he tumbled downward almost immediately. I watched him roll through the dirt, hitting the ground several times before finally stopping. For a second, everything became silent inside my head. Then I heard him yelling. The boy who had spent years making me feel powerless was suddenly the one lying in the dirt, confused and angry, trying to understand what had happened. I knew I couldn't stay there. Instinct took over, and I quickly walked away from the area and headed toward the bathroom. I stood there pretending to use the restroom while listening to the noise outside. He was shouting, asking who had done it, and demanding answers. I could hear the anger in his voice, but I could also hear something I had never heard from him before: confusion. For once, he did not have control of the situation. Looking back, childhood emotions often feel much larger than they appear from the outside. Small events can become turning points because they represent years of bottled up feelings. For me, this wasn't simply about a few seconds on the playground. It felt like every insult, every stolen item, and every moment of humiliation had finally reached a breaking point. When school ended later that day, I saw him again. His clothes were dirty, his face had visible injuries, and he still seemed upset and confused about what had happened. He continued looking around, searching for answers that never came. And as I walked home that afternoon, I realized that one single moment had changed everything between us forever. After that day, the entire school seemed to know that something had happened to him, but nobody knew who had done it. He spent the rest of the afternoon walking around with dirt on his clothes, scratches on his face, and anger written all over him. He kept asking people questions, trying to figure out who had pushed him. Every time I heard him demanding answers, I stayed quiet, just as I had done for years. The strange thing was that nobody even looked at me as a suspect. I had always been the quiet kid, the one who avoided trouble and stayed out of arguments. Because of that, people naturally assumed that someone else must have been responsible. Some students blamed older kids. Others thought it had been someone from another class. A few even believed that several boys had attacked him together. Meanwhile, I sat in my classroom acting exactly as I always had. I answered questions, completed my work, and kept my head down. Inside, however, everything felt different. For the first time in years, I was not the one feeling afraid. He was the one looking over his shoulder, wondering who had done it. Over the next several days, he continued trying to solve the mystery. During recess, he asked people where they had been standing. He tried to remember who had been nearby. Sometimes he became angry and accused random students, but nobody could give him the answer he wanted. The truth was sitting only a few feet away from him every single day, yet he never even considered me. As children, people often think that strength belongs to the loudest person in the room. The bully usually appears powerful because everyone fears him. But sometimes, the quietest person carries the deepest emotions. Years of insults, stolen belongings, and humiliation had taught me how to remain invisible, and that same invisibility became the reason he never discovered the truth. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. He started missing school. At first, nobody paid much attention to it, but his absences became more frequent. Eventually, he stopped coming altogether. Rumors spread through the classrooms. Some students said his family had moved. Others believed he changed schools. Nobody seemed to know the real reason. Even after all these years, I don't think he ever found out who it was. I never told my friends, my family, or anyone else. The secret remained mine alone. Looking back, it wasn't the revenge itself that stayed with me the longest. It was the fact that the boy who spent years making me feel powerless never realized that the quiet kid he ignored was the one who changed everything. And to this day, he still has no idea it was me. Even now, years later, I sometimes think back to those days and realize how deeply childhood experiences can affect us. The insults, the stolen belongings, and the constant humiliation stayed with me for a long time, but so did the lesson that nobody should be underestimated. The quietest person in the room may be carrying the heaviest burden. I never told anyone what happened, and I never needed recognition for it. The boy who made my childhood miserable eventually disappeared from my life, while I moved forward stronger than before. Some secrets stay with us forever. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply knowing that justice, in your own way, was finally served.